Today's episode of This Week in Startups is brought to you by SeatGeek, the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event. Download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code TWIST for $20 off your first purchase. And WordPress. Get started today with 50% off any new planned purchase. Go to wordpress.com/twist to create your website and find the plan that's right for you.
Hey everybody, welcome back to This Week in Startups, the show that I host twice a week here in the Silicon Valley. And with my insider status, yes, my incredible network, I get to meet with the greatest investors and entrepreneurs of our time and document what they're doing. Today on the program, I'm having Color.com back on the program. Literally, Color.com was on the program 7 or 8 years ago. However, it was the original Color, which was a photo sharing app, but you now, Othman Laraki, I pronounce it correct?
Yeah,
Othman
that's
Laraki?
right. Yep.
And it's Moroccan. You're of Moroccan descent.
Yes, that's right.
We talked about it a little bit before. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, you're the CEO now of Color Genomics. Mm-hmm. And you bought the domain name Color.com, I guess, from Sequoia Capital or who owned it after Color.com went bust, the photo sharing location app from 7 years ago.
Yeah,
8 years ago.
There's a long story there, but
give me the short version.
The short version is, when we started Color, I guess about 5 years ago, we're a healthcare company, and we wanted a name that people could relate to, that has a positive connotation, and that just kind of, and also because we're a genetics company, there's kind of a nice wink to genetics, where chromosomes mean colored bodies in Greek, and so
chromosomes means colored body in Greek.
And so,
correct.
That is correct. Yes.
That's correct. And, I'm Greek. I don't speak Greek. I wouldn't know that, but I'm going to say
we actually just passed the citizenship test, right?
Exactly.
But we like the name.
Such a great name.
And so but the domain name was taken, so we got getcolor.com.
Sure.
But then over time we someone that I'd worked with prior when I was at Google and then at Twitter, Katie Stanton, who's a very good friend and runs marketing for us.
I know Katie.
So Katie's amazing. And
she's on the board of, she just joined the board
Vivendi and Time. And
yes.
She's
a baller.
She's awesome. Yeah. And so, I have the privilege of working with her a third time around. And when she joined us as our chief marketing officer, she's like, we have to get color.com domain name. And so she, took it on as a mission to kind of go and, find,
do the archaeology
and dig it back up. And
because sometimes a company, this is what people don't realize. A company goes out of business. The assets are frozen somewhere. Exactly. Nobody knows what the status is. Yeah. And then you're basically trying to figure out who owns the domain name and who can release it to you. Nobody knows who's in charge, but somehow you figured out where it was.
Katie did that.
Katie did that.
So that
it's $1 million domain name. I hope you didn't pay $1 million, but maybe give a little equity to this.
She did an amazing job, and I think it's been a great way to actually I spoke with a number of the prior Color.com founders, or early employees like DJ Patel, et cetera, and I'm like, my goal is to redeem the name.
Yes, it's a new legacy. Well, Color, people can go watch the old episode, but it was just it got derided a bit because they had raised so much money, which I guess was at the time just a little confounding to people. But tell us, Color Genomics, you refer to it just as Color now.
Yeah.
But Color Genomics was the original name, I believe. What is Color's mission, and why did you guys start it? Because I know your partner, Elad Gil, your partner on this was Elad Gil, correct?
Yeah,
he's a co-founder,
right.
which he's been on the program too.
Yeah. And, the background of Color and the kind of the core mission of Color is that we're a population health company where we're focused on, using genetics as a way to really engage people in preventative health in terms of helping them get ahead of some of the most important healthcare risks in their lives. So historically, we've been focused on cancer and cardiovascular risk, so heart attack. And
two of the major killers.
Yeah, they're literally the top two in the U.S. and
obesity globally. Is so where on that list now? Yeah, we know that lung cancer went down because people stopped smoking. That used to be number one, right?
Yeah.
I think, but now you have cardiovascular
and the kind of other broad cancers, and the and with obesity, it's like it has a lot of side effects that can be cardiovascular, could be et cetera. So
could cause cancer,
exactly. Right? And so it's kind of like a precursor to a lot of diseases. But we kind of in terms of the origin of the company, it was actually connected to some personal and family history. So my background was all in software and technology. I was at Google for a number of years. Started a company.
Well, you were also the product manager at Twitter.
Yeah, and so
for some period of time. I don't know when.
Yeah, it was for
pre-moments or post-moments?
Pre-moments.
Okay.
Pre-moments,
because moments was the big polarizing moment for Twitter. Some people love the moments. Other people don't like moments.
It was a moment of dissent, or actually a moment that caused an eternity of dissent. But
it seems like moments has done pretty well.
Yeah. I think over time, I think the team's done an amazing job iterating.
They figured it out. Yeah.
It's kind of evolved.
Were you involved in lists at Twitter? I feel like that's the feature.
Level, yeah.
That's the feature that has not been addressed.
I agree.
It's the killer feature of Twitter. It's lists.
It's kind of that. And I think it's an incredible source of information and signaling. And I think it was still very heavily underutilized, and I think has a lot of.
What did you do at Google? I don't know actually what were you product manager at Google of?
Yeah, so I worked on a number of different products. I was involved with a lot of the kind of early browser work that we did. So
Chrome, you mean?
So Chrome, but even before that, the Google Toolbar, which you might remember.
Sure.
So I was product manager for that for many years, and did a lot of the work in our collaboration with Firefox and the kind of early days.
Mozilla, right?
Yeah,
sure.
Exactly. So kind of had done a lot of in the browser world as well as on the performance infrastructure.
That was a pretty controversial thing. You guys were. Mozilla started making $200-300 million a year off of Google search revenue share.
Yep.
I remember people telling me they didn't know what to do because a nonprofit had never been
so profitable. Yeah.
A nonprofit has never been profitable like that. So they literally didn't know, the IRS and the people at Mozilla didn't know how to do it. I think they wound up splitting into a profit company and a nonprofit and putting the profits in the profit company and then funding the nonprofit from it or something.
I'm not sure how kind of they managed that, but something. But I think it was a really interesting phase in that kind of the entire cycle of internet, because it really, that will like the precursor to that was the toolbar, because that gave people helped all of us realize how important that having that search box in the browser was in terms of impacting behavior.
Yep.
And so that's why it got integrated into all the browsers, and that completely changed how browsers monetize and how a lot of Google.
It actually forced Google's hand and made them create Chrome, right? It was just too much. It was too much revenue and too much search and too much power to not control a browser for that company.
Yeah, and also it was such a core part of Google's existence that was tied to the browser, and also the ability to influence the platform evolution, because even the evolution of HTML had been very slow, et cetera. So really being able to influence standards really changes if you control a big, one of the dominant browsers. And
right.
So that was,
and they had that very contentious relationship with Microsoft, and Microsoft had their
Apple
own, and they had their own views of what open source for browsers meant, right? And that wasn't always in sync. So let's get back to color here for a second. It's a kit. I'm holding it up for people who are watching on video now, and you swab your cheek.
Yeah, it's a saliva sample.
Spit in it.
Yeah. And so the way it works is, the color test is a physician order test where you what you do is you provide a saliva sample, and depending on the choices that you made, it can either cover your risk of cancer and or your risk of elevated cholesterol, because your genes can have a very big effect on your cancer risk. So for example, average male will have, a risk of, 1 or 2% for colon cancer in a lifetime. But for example, there are mutations in for example, a gene called APC, where you can be between 70 and 80 and 100% lifetime risk. So so they can have dramatic effects.
So you're basically almost guaranteed to get colon cancer if you live long enough. In certain cases.
And so what's interesting is that, today, most of medicine and care is focused on waiting until you break and then they try to fix you. And it turns out that if you focus on prevention, early detection, you can really move the entire cost and outcomes equation.
Got it.
To give you one example of a statistic that I find to be pretty telling is, if you just move the stage of detection of cancers by one stage earlier, you literally double survival and take out 30% of the cost of cancer.
Wait, so if you catch it early,
just
double
one
the
stage
chance,
earlier.
Stage earlier.
You double the survival on average, and you take out about 30%.
For which cancer is that?
If when you kind of blend all the big cancers,
got it.
It's in some cases actually more than that, in some cases less. But if you take all the big ones and clump them together, you roughly get that kind of ratio, which is a dramatic effect, right? And
so if I'm doing Ancestry has some sort of DNA test, 23andMe has a DNA test, and then Color has a DNA test, correct?
Yeah.
These are all DNA tests. In the previous two, they're taking your DNA to tell you where you're from and your ethnicity and your family history. So you can find out, hey, maybe you're not Greek, you're Turkish. Some great grandmother may have, married somebody in Turkey, not Greek. There might be some explaining to do, et cetera. It's all kinds of interesting surprises that come up. But that's not what Color does.
Yeah, so
Color is not telling you where you're from. Color is telling you what you might get in terms of disease. The other two companies, do they do that as well or no?
So we're no is the short answer.
Yeah.
And the reason is like the underlying technology, even though you submit a saliva sample in both cases, the actual DNA technology that we use is very different.
Got it.
What they use is it's called the SNP test, which is like a 20-year-old technology that gives you a general sampling of your genetics. Which is great for things like Ancestry because all you really need to know is a general statistical statement about yourself. Whereas what we do is actually complete sequencing of genes that are important for health. And so we'll take a gene like the BRCA1, the BRCA1 gene that became famous around Angelina Jolie's story a few years ago. That's a gene where...
What was that story? I don't know that story.
So Angelina Jolie had... she wrote this piece in the New York Times about 4 years ago, talking about how she has a mutation in this gene called the BRCA1 gene that causes her to have much higher risk of breast cancer and much higher risk of ovarian cancer.
And she did the preventative mastectomy.
Exactly.
A preventative double mastectomy.
Exactly.
It was highly controversial at the time. Why was that controversial?
Well, it's controversial because it's a very aggressive and big action to take.
So potentially unnecessary, would some people say? Would some doctors say that's jumping the gun?
So that used to be the feeling at the time. And now it's evolved quite a bit because for someone like her, her mother died of, I think it was ovarian cancer in her case, but those two are linked. So Angelina Jolie, based on her genetics, has like 80% risk of breast cancer, 50% risk of ovarian cancer. So
she said, just take out my ovaries, take off my,
and
get the double mastectomy.
Those are the choices that she made. And that's actually now become the recommendation by the national bodies. It's recommended that the doctors suggest it to patients, and it's a personal choice, right? It's
right, because it's such a personal thing to do, to have body parts removed, so when she did it, it was controversial. But since that time, it's less controversial, if I'm understanding correctly.
Exactly. Like now there's even a kind of a term for women who've chosen to do that, which is previvors. So not survivors who kind of
previvors.
Preemptively survivors by making this choice.
All right. When we get back from this quick break, I want to understand exactly how far this technology will go. In that, right now there are so many cancers, and what I would like to know is, are we going to solve any of these cancers, or is it early detection that's the best solution for our generation? Or in future generations, if you get enough of these DNA samples, are we going to be able to make custom drugs like I hear about from people at TED conferences and whatnot that will solve cancer even when it arrives, when we get back on This Week in Startups? I am so pleased to announce that SeatGeek is joining us here on This Week in Startups. I am a huge SeatGeek fan. I use that app all the time. When I say all the time, I do mean all the time, to get great prices on great tickets quickly and easily. When I go to New York, I want to see the unicorn, Kristaps Porzingis, and my Knicks. And I literally bought tickets at 4 p.m. for a 7 p.m. game. I took my mom to see Bruce Springsteen on Broadway. And then out here, I go to the Warriors games, and I have a lot of friends who have tickets. I don't want to bother them and ask them for their tickets because there's so many amazing seats available that you can buy quickly and easily, and save tons of time and money. You get great deals. And they grade every ticket based on the value to help you immediately identify the best seat that fits your budget. So a lot of times I say, you know what, I want to go to this game, but I want to spend this amount. I'm bringing 6 people. Sometimes, there's let me be honest. Every time we're going to the game, I'm winding up picking up the tickets. Sometimes I'm like, oh God, I took 8 people to a Knicks game when I was in New York. I'm not buying courtside seats. I'm not buying first 5 row seats. Now, sometimes I just take my wife. It's the 2 of us. Yeah, maybe I'll buy first, second, third row seats, but I'm not going to do that with 8. So I kind of learned to use the system, and it's really easy. And every purchase is fully guaranteed. And this is the most important part. You do not, in 2018, want to go and try to talk to scalpers and buy tickets because you or Craigslist or these other places, it's all very dangerous. People all the time, I see them go to games and go to concerts and they're crying at the door because somebody has sold them a fugazi, a fake ticket. You want to use SeatGeek. You want to find the best price. And it is amazing how many tickets are available for comedy, concerts, theaters, and sporting events. And here's your call to action. Go ahead. Twist listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. What a deal. Get that $20 off. Download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code TWIST. That promo code again is TWIST. And when you use it with SeatGeek, you will get $20 off your first purchase. Go ahead and download the app right now while you're listening to the show. SeatGeek. It is an amazing, amazing service. I love it. Thank you so much, SeatGeek, for supporting independent media like This Week in Startups and making a great product. Okay, let's get back to this episode. Welcome back to This Week in Startups. I'm your host, Jason Calacanis. You can follow me on Twitter @Jason, or you can email me anytime, jason@calacanis.com, if you have an idea for a guest on this very program. And today, my guest is Othman Laraki.
That's a perfect
I got it right.
way to say my name.
Othman. What is Is there an origin for Othman? What is does it mean something? I know it's Moroccan.
Yeah.
Does it mean something?
I don't think. At least if it does, I do not know the meaning. It doesn't mean something in a
Hey, you're the first Othman I know.
Yeah,
that's it. And you know what? You're actually the first Moroccan I know. I don't know many people from Morocco.
You should come visit.
Did you grow up there?
Yeah, I grew up there.
When did you come to America? When did you leave?
So I grew up in Casablanca until I was 18, and then I came here for college.
You literally grew up in Casablanca.
Yeah, which was a great place to come from when you were single and want to seem interesting. So
is it like a super mysterious, interesting place, or is it just us because of the movie and Humphrey Bogart that we actually project a lot into? What is Casablanca actually like?
So Casablanca itself is just this big city it's actually pretty cool and interesting. It's a bit crazy, but it's like 6 million people, so it's a pretty big city. But in Morocco, there are like a lot of amazing places, like Marrakesh and Fez.
I hear about Marrakesh. It's incredible.
So
is it safe? Place. Is it safe to go to Morocco today?
It's super. It's super safe. It's way safer than the U.S.
Yeah.
No one has guns, which unfortunately, right, makes the U.S. much less, right. So it's actually a very safe place.
Got it. And it's not a democracy exactly. It's got a king.
Yeah. So it's a constitutional monarchy where there's a king and a parliament that together run the government, and it works pretty well actually.
Are you the first person in your family to come to America?
To live here, yes, but my family's been kind of back and forth quite a bit.
Got it. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, you should come visit.
And you came here for college?
Yeah.
Where did you go to school?
Stanford.
You went to Stanford? Couldn't get into Harvard? That's my standard joke. Stanford's better.
Alas, Harvard.
And did you go for your master's as well at Stanford? Or?
I was at MIT for grad school. And
oh, really? Media Lab? Where'd you go?
I was actually at Sloan. Was doing this kind of like a financial engineering program. I had kind of a data.
Very nice.
Data background,
very nice.
So
good pedigree there. Let's get back to color for a second here. When we left, we were talking about testing for cancer, BRCA test or BRCA test. Yep. Is it pronounced BRCA or BRCA?
We like to call it BRCA because actually the woman who discovered the BRCA1 gene, Mary Claire King, is a very close collaborator of ours, and that's how she calls it. And so we're like, that's the way it should be called. Yeah.
So you can now what cancers can you alert me to if I take the color test? And what does it cost to take this test? Like $5,000?
It's so normally these tests used to cost $2,000 to $4,000, and ours costs.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, it costs $250.
$250,
almost 20x less.
Do you lose money on each test?
No, we do not.
You break even on a test?
No, we actually sell them at a margin.
Really?
We took kind of like almost like a SpaceX style mindset where sometimes when you have these like super inefficient industries where there's a lot of fat that is in the system. For us, we were a team that had a very deep software engineering, machine learning background, combined with a lot of great geneticists. Actually, my co-founder Elad has a PhD in genetics, and we pulled in some of the top people from both sides, and really kind of used state-of-the-art technology, but took a bit first principles around building the entire kind of management stack and operational stack to really optimize.
Explain to the audience here of entrepreneurs who may not know what taking a first principles approach means, because we hear Elon say it sometimes, or Peter Thiel. What does it mean, first principles?
I think it means like
to you,
to understand, how every piece of the system that you need to deliver a product works, and really digging into it to essentially go under the hood. So you don't just get, for example, we buy these robots they're not really cool robots that kind of talk to you, like more like these big boxes that handle liquids and move them very efficiently.
Lab robots.
They kind of my kids were very disappointed.
They're not Terminators.
Yeah, my kids were very disappointed when I told them,
they're more like sorters.
Exactly. They're like, oh, these robots don't talk. But they're there are these companies that make these very expensive pieces of equipment, where if you can use them off the shelf, and use kind of like the standard software or standard equipment, that will have a certain yield and certain efficiency. What we've done is, for example, we've actually built some components ourselves that go into these robots that dramatically increase yield and that dramatically reduce costs, like whether it's in the plastics or
so going down to like, hey, let's not have any assumptions. Let's look at every piece of the puzzle and try to make it 10x better, 20x better, because really the technology for what you're doing has been there for a while, but at massive expense.
Exactly.
Massive
so normally
expense.
it costs like, a huge amount to get these labs going and to get them really at scale. And then the other piece too is like, by now most of the cost for doing genetics is actually not in the lab world. It's actually in the data world. It's actually interpreting and managing that data. And that's where, we have kind of the really deep kind of.
Do you need to have like some crazy computer system like that's incredibly powerful to do this work, or will a standard desktop computer or /server at EC2, Amazon's web service, be able to do this?
If you use, good distributed systems infrastructure, you can accomplish much more actually than you can oftentimes with the supercomputers. Like you don't need, actually a distributed systems approach has enabled us to really go much further than a lot of the published information.
So instead of using $1 million computer, you use $1,000 computers, or 100
exactly
$1,000 computers, and you'll get more done with that parallel CPU processing.
1,000 nodes on a spot instances on EC2 will do much better.
And you can pop them up and pop them down and never have to rack servers. So this all is cloud computing is a precursor to a company like Color, isn't it? Without cloud computing, you wouldn't be able to do what you do.
It's absolutely fundamental building block to be able to have our cost structure, and especially that plus the software layer that comes on top. For example, we use a lot of machine learning to, for example, to improve yield and quality, to detect, for example, if a sample is going to fail, we know about it way ahead of time before we've wasted money on it. And so being able to throw a lot of compute power to analyze all the data efficiently is actually a very big part of being able to shave off a lot of costs. So.
And explain to the audience in this instance what machine learning means versus just programming an algorithm or studying the data. What is the machine trying to learn every time it goes through a sample?
Yeah, so I'll give you a concrete example.
Yeah, please.
So when you're processing samples and you find a mutation, so say you take a color test and we see mutation in your BRCA1 gene, and it looks like that. Based on existing data, et cetera, that's a bad mutation, that it might increase your risk. One of the things we want to know is that, are we 100% sure that mutation is in your sample? And so what you do is you send your you resequence your sample using a different technology to kind of do a double check to
redundancy.
make sure that there wasn't kind of some arbitrary bias in the default technology that you
mistake.
Using. Yeah, like and normally, the ability to detect that, is very expensive and takes a lot of time. We built a machine learning model that uses all of the data that we've seen across, thousands of samples, so that we are able to predict whether it's actually there or not with, essentially 100% precision. So like in over thousands of samples that we've tested it against.
Yeah, so. It was like, I remember when I was starting out in the legal field, doing like computers for them, they would take two different data entry people and have them type in a case.
And corroborate. Yeah.
And then corroborate and say, oh, let's see if there's any deltas. Like, okay, you typed in the same case that I typed in. We took some case out of we got a photocopy of it from 1972. We both typed it in, and then we look for errors.
Yeah.
Because the chances of us both making the same error is almost impossible. And if you find the errors, at least you can say, oh, wow, maybe this word was blurred or something. And in your case, it might be, hey, maybe this sequence in the genome was blurred or
there's a bias
obscured,
in the equipment, et cetera.
A bias is what you call it,
Yeah, because like, the sequencers, for example, will sometimes have like areas where they make systematic errors. And so but they're very hard to reason about in an algorithmic way. And so what you do here is you have a machine learning model that is able to, for say 95% of all these cases, be like, okay, we really are sure that this is there. And then there's the 5% still in doubt. You can kind of resequence them and test them again.
All right, when we get back from this final break, I want you to answer a very important question, which is, you've got this cancer test, the cholesterol test, the BRCA test, all these different tests. What I'm trying to figure out is, why doesn't everybody just take a test? Or why don't we all take all of these tests and just share all that data and try to have a prevention database that is 100% of the people in the United States? Because we could easily afford to do that given the abundance here in the United States. And I'm trying to figure out why we just don't have everybody take these half dozen tests and avoid massive deaths and unnecessary suffering, as well as maybe get some insights into what's going on with the human genome and disease. We'll answer that when we get back here on This Week in Startups. Yes, WordPress. Super easy for me to tell you about WordPress because I use it every day at calacanis.com and at thisweekinstartups.com. Your business obviously needs to have a home online. If you're listening to this podcast, you know that. And you are going to make it super easy for your customers to find you when you use WordPress.com. They will guide you through the process from start to finish. It's super easy. You don't need to have any experience setting up a website to use WordPress.com, and they take care of all the technical stuff, and they get you up and running quickly. Of course, they have award-winning customer support available 24 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and on the weekends. That's the joke. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. You're not going to be left behind, and they're going to help you. Plans start at just $4 a month. What a deal. And all WordPress plans include a custom domain name for the life of the plan. They're going to give you that domain name with your WordPress service. So come see why 28% of all websites on the interwebs run on WordPress. That statistic is mind-boggling, but true. 28% of all websites run on WordPress. So here's your call to action. Get started today with 15% off any new plan that you purchase, and go to WordPress.com/twist to create your website and find the plan that's right for you. That's WordPress.com/twist for 15% off your brand new website. WordPress.com/twist. Go ahead and use the same software and same platform I use for my personal blog, calacanis.com, as well as thisweekinstartups.com, which Jackie, Emmy Award-winning producer Jackie, is using every day. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode. Welcome back. My guest today, Othman Laraki. He is Othman on the Twitter, Othman. And he is the co-founder and now CEO of Color, previously known as Color Genomics, I guess. You can visit them at color.com. You're also an angel investor in about 80 companies. We share that in common. Passion for investing. I see you're in Instacart, which I love. Slack, which I like. Pinterest, which my wife loves. And AngelList, which I used to be the largest syndicate on and I left, but I still love. So you like spreading a little bit of splashy cashy around, investing in startups?
For me, it's been really about... I really enjoy working with people that are starting new things and trying to kind of really help and be involved. And in some ways, like the investment is just sometimes more of an incidental way to kind of do that.
It cements the bond, makes it real.
It kind of it creates the context, or a substrate for a relationship in some sense.
It's like marriage.
How to help people, exactly. It's like
got a ring. Like we're married, and now let's get to work.
Yeah, exactly.
So when I left you, I have these two hanging questions. One, are we going to cure cancer? But before I get to that, these tests are so cheap. I'm wondering, if there would be value in doing a national project, because we're talking about doing an infrastructure project, right? Trump's going to spend $1.5 trillion on infrastructure, supposedly. And Obama tried to do it during his presidency. Looks like it's going to get done now. Would it make sense to do a Manhattan project / huge project to have everybody take these tests in the country, or is it unnecessary? And if we did have everybody take all of these tests, what would change in the world, if anything?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something actually this notion is starting to gain a lot of momentum, where there've been by now a few papers that have done these kind of economic analyses that, in terms of literally, it would actually save money as well as a lot of lives to be able to, have people know about extremely elevated risks for cancer and cardiovascular risk. In fact, actually, the UK is kind of ahead of the US in that a little bit right now, where they've had a few kind of big publications around it, and that's definitely moving in that direction. The US is so huge that's a very big choice, but the interesting thing is that I think it's in the US, what's really moving is the people that some of the biggest payers of healthcare in the U.S. are large employers. And a couple of years ago, we started working with large employers to make color available to their entire employee base as a benefit.
So you could go to a Google or something or
Exactly.
a Facebook and say, listen, this only costs $250, $500, a couple different tests. Why don't you make it free for everybody and make them feel good about working here?
Exactly. And so we have, a lot of amazing companies like NVIDIA, Salesforce, SAP, and even GE Appliances, et cetera. So not just kind of like tech companies. Visa was one of our first ones. And what's interesting is that it ends up being, first of all, a very popular benefit where people really are very grateful for it because it's something they care about.
Sure.
But then for the employers, there's kind of the goodwill side, but also when you actually look at the math, late stage cancers that they're paying for cost so much that, literally sometimes, so a late stage ovarian cancer, for example, will cost between $500,000 and $500,000 and $1 million.
Wow.
If it's caught early, it's like $25,000.
Just to maintain or just to manage.
Exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, at that stage, survival is very low.
Right. So you're basically spending I don't mean to be morbid and put a price on life, but that is something that maybe we don't do enough of, is to think about, hey, when we're allocating these resources, allocating $500,000 or $1 million to the last year of somebody's life, why not allocate some of that to the prime years of their life? Well, this is a tough conversation to have, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tough because it's like savings. It's hard to invest early for returns later. But in this case, literally with a lot of the employers that we work with, even the first case that they catch pays for the entire program.
Amazing.
And that's been kind of the big finding. And because really what we're about as a company, we don't think of ourselves as a genetics company. We think of ourselves as a population health company that really focuses on prevention, early detection. And genetics is a really important tool in the same way there's an example I use is Google runs the biggest data centers in the world, but you don't think of Google as a data center company.
No.
And for us, the genetics is a core building block of what we do, but the purpose is not just to sequence people. The purpose is to engage people with prevention and early detection, because I think that's what makes a difference.
To be clear, if you had 1,000 people take the test, 999 are come back clean, and so you spent $250,000 doing that test on 1,000 people. But if one of them comes back and they have colon cancer, prostate cancer, whatever it is, ovarian cancer, I think it's the example you used, if that person then does something preventative, i.e. maybe having their ovaries removed, in the case of Angelina Jolie, elected to do that and be a Previvor.
Yeah.
Previvor, and you just said, hey, I'm going to be a Previvor. Now you don't have to do chemo. I don't know what exactly the treatment for ovarian cancer is.
And actually, oftentimes,
frequently ends in a painful and quick and arduous death.
Yeah, and oftentimes the action is not even like surgery. For example, the colon cancer risk example I gave you earlier, the main change that happens is instead of you starting to get colonoscopies in your 50s and onward, you would start in your 35. So it's just a change of screening timeline. So women start getting mammograms at 25.
I'm 47. Oh my goodness.
So you better get on it.
I just realized I'm 47. My dad had prostate cancer.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I got to get I know they're not related, but I guess I
Well, actually, a lot of the cancers are interlinked. Oftentimes people think, so for example, I'm actually a BRCA2 carrier.
You are?
Myself, yeah. And so and that's one of the reasons I, started the company. And having firsthand seen in my family, like, the impact of not having it as well as the impact of having it. And, today, over 90% of the carriers still don't know that they're carriers. And when people know, they can, for example, women who is a BRCA1 carrier, if she starts getting just mammograms at the right time at 25 instead of waiting until she's 45, she cuts in half her likelihood of dying from breast cancer, right? So just by catching it earlier, without surgery, without anything. And so that's, I think where
is there a way
to
to
impact
block the hereditary nature of these diseases? In other words, if you're BRCA or maybe you have cystic fibrosis or something, is there a way to prevent passing it on with technology today, i.e. selection of
Yeah, you can do
eggs?
selection because for example, when you're a carrier, that means you have one bad copy and one good one.
Correct.
And so half of your sperm or egg will not have it, the other half will. And so you can do selection.
So if you were to have kids, or if Angelina Jolie knew she had this and she was going to have kids, she could just select to make sure that they don't wind up carrying it. Would that then eventually take it out of the gene pool?
Yeah, that could. I mean, in general, there will always be these mutations in the population because they also happen spontaneously over time.
Oh, I see.
So it's not something that a lot of them are carried through generations, but they also do happen kind of, so I don't think they'll ever be eradicated. I think on the flip side, now when you identify the population, it becomes something that becomes eminently addressable. Like, because right now, the people who have high risk, they just look like unlucky people, right? Like, if you know someone who, we all know someone who had a heart attack at 45, that,
Sure.
someone who just like used to run marathons and one day he has, and oftentimes those will be people that have, for example, familial hypercholesterolemia, so super high cholesterol that's driven by their genetics. And it's very actionable because they just need to take statins. And if they're on the right drugs, their risk, they go from a 50% risk of heart attack down to average population.
They just don't know.
And they just don't know.
They're just blind to it.
And so these are like just things where once you kind of identify the populations, they can prevent and early detect, which makes, I think, a huge difference.
You made this 10 times cheaper. Can you make it 10 times cheaper again?
I would like to. I think eventually it will be either 10 times cheaper or, it already is at the point where it costs less than the value it adds to the system.
Sure.
So it's already crossed the ROI positive stage, which I think is actually the important threshold. There are a lot of things that are $25 that are not worth doing for everyone. And, there are things that are, like this at $250 that are worth doing for
So
everyone.
it's already a deal. It's probably doesn't matter.
From a payer standpoint, it's already in the ROI positive territory.
Got it.
But, we're constantly working on pushing it down. So, for example, our BRCA 1 and 2 test is at $100, which is a dramatic, literally people are still billing insurance $2,000, $3,000 for these exact same tests.
And you got it down to $99. There's no reason for everybody not to take this test.
It's still a choice between individual and their doctor, and it's always but it's
doctor has to assign this. You can't just do it yourself.
There's always a physician involved.
So I can ask my physician.
You can ask your physician.
Can I take these?
Yeah, and if you don't have a physician and you kind of just go online and buy a color test, we can also refer people out to third-party network, networks of physicians. Like I said, it's telemedicine kind of setup where so we make that very low friction, so it's not a pain.
Did you know you had this BRCA before you started the company? Was this directly led to this?
I did, yeah. I found out when my...
How did you find out?
So my grandmother passed away from breast cancer. My mother's a 2-time breast cancer survivor.
So is my mom.
And you should get tested, by the way. At her second diagnosis or after her second treatment, her doctor was like, you should get tested. And so she got tested. She found she's a carrier, and then I found out my carrier myself.
So you found out from your mom, then you got yourself tested.
Yeah, and
with these old $1,000 tests.
With the $5,000 test.
Oh my goodness!
This was when I was still at Google, actually.
So you had Google's ridiculous
So I had great insurance
plan,
was
or
still,
you wouldn't have done it if you had to pay yourself.
It was still an incredible pain. I still had to go back and forth to the doctor like 4 or 5 times.
Why?
Because you have to jump through a lot of hoops in order for insurance to accept to cover it.
Oh, I see. So it's sort of like if you want to take sleep medicine, they make you go to the sleep
clinic or whatever.
To prove that you have insomnia or whatever.
Exactly. So
apnea.
It's called utilization management.
It's called putting hurdles up so people don't get medicine.
Yeah, and so
right. I mean, that basically is what it is.
Yeah, it's kind of
what it is. It's a roadblock.
It's essentially. I mean, it's a very common practice, and so we really focus on obviating all of that. Making it just completely unnecessary. So, but so I found out at the time. So that's what gave me a lot of interest in this. In the connection between genetics and disease, and it's personal. Yeah, it's kind of
super personal.
Yeah.
So do you know? Are you doing things to prevent cancer now? What do you now that you know that you're? Yeah. So you have this BRCA like Angelina Jolie, but you don't have breasts or ovaries. So what do you do?
So men can get breast cancer.
I heard this.
Yeah, and so
infrequent.
And so it's very infrequent. So as a carrier of a mutation, I have a reasonably high risk of it. It's not anywhere close to women, but it's like about 6%. But what happens with men is that you tend to notice it early, but men will ignore it because they think it's a cyst or something, and they lose like 6 months.
So they feel a bump. They're like, "What could this be? Who cares? I'm a guy."
And you just don't do anything about it. Yeah. But if you know you're a carrier, if you feel something, you go deal with it immediately. That's one. Yeah.
It's not like we can get mammograms. That's not possible, right?
It's actually possible. It's supposed to be incredibly painful.
I can just imagine putting your non-breasts into a machine to flatten them.
My doctor at Stanford was like, that is the only time she's seen grown men cry.
Is to have their breasts
when they've
pancaked done that. That is what happens, correct?
Yeah.
You're basically having your breasts flattened, and this is what women go through.
Yes.
We don't go through.
That we don't go through because we are incapable, I think, of going through it.
Yeah. Well, women, actually, speaking of male and female differences, women have a much higher pain threshold than men, i.e. childbirth.
Yeah.
It's much more painful than anything we experience in our lives.
So I think even just being vigilant for it. Also prostate cancer. So having so as a BRCA carrier, you have a higher risk of prostate cancer.
Yeah.
So it's about getting screened, but also it turns out even from a treatment standpoint, if you have prostate cancer, the type of treatment you would get would likely be different if your doctor knows you're a carrier. The problem is that most prostate cancer patients do not get tested. And so, for example, we're doing a study at the University with the Hutch in Washington State. It's called the Gentleman Study, where they're testing. It's open to all metastatic prostate cancer patients in the entire state of Washington, for example. And it's really around, because it turns out something like 12% of metastatic prostate cancer patients are carriers of these mutations. And if you know about it, you can actually improve their outcomes with a different type of chemotherapy.
Because my dad's a survivor of prostate cancer. My mom's a breast cancer survivor. And I guess they can take out the lymph nodes, they can put the seeds in, they can do chemo, they can do hormone therapy. And my dad's PSA went to like 14 or something.
Okay.
And the doctors were like, say goodbye. And it's really emotional, oh my God, Dad's going to die this year.
Yeah.
And then they come back and they do hormone therapy and they're like, oh yeah, no, PSA is like 0.1.
Oh wow, that's
it's 0.2. Oh no, Dad's good. It's gonna live forever.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
I'm like, really, guys?
Yeah.
Is this PSA correct? Is this an accurate thing? PSA, because I had mine tested. I was on the floor. It was good. I think.
I think with all of these kind of screening tools, they all have error bars. But the thing is, for mammograms, oftentimes there are these big, every few years people say about how inaccurate mammograms are, and then there's a big flurry about should women be getting as frequent mammograms, et cetera. But it turns out knowing your risk helps you calibrate the information you get from other screening tools. So for example, if you see something in a woman a 41-year-old on a mammogram, if she doesn't have anything in BRCA or any of the other genes, doesn't have a lot of family history, that's a very different information than if she's a BRCA1 carrier.
Yeah, and mom and grandma both died.
Exactly. And so
God forbid of breast cancer.
So you can literally have the same image and the meaning of it is statistically very different if you know someone's background risk. And so that's what this does. It really allows you to kind of have a real notion of risk.
Okay, so now the other thing we hear a lot about is custom drugs based upon our DNA profiles or just customized to individuals. Is this real? Is this going to become a thing? Will it happen in our lifetime? And what impact will it have on cancer?
Yeah, no, it's actually already happening, and the granularity is increasing. Like the way to think about it is like, historically, when you developed a drug, it's like one size fits all. It's like, you know, you have this like, like chemotherapy and, like,
here's a bat.
Platinum therapy.
Swing the bat.
It generally kills the cancer before it in some cases it kills cancer before it kills the person, and so we'll just use it forever. And then it's like you start segmenting the population based on different attributes, whether it's attributes of the cancer or attributes of the person. And so increasingly now you're starting to segment more and more. And that's very important because it allows you to, similarly with screening, you can be much more precise about the target that you're actually going after. And so I think it's a real thing. And I think it's a big deal because it really allows you to have the maximal effect with the minimum collateral damage. Right. And so, like, for example, even chemotherapy, like, between 20 years ago versus now, just the dosages, the overall impact has gone way down.
Where they focus it at, right? I mean, it used to be a very wide range that it would be shotgun at you.
Exactly.
I mean, basically like your whole body, and now they're getting very precise.
Exactly. So increasing that precision, and it's the same thing that's happening at the molecular level. Both of the diseases like the cancer or the patient, the person in general, as well as kind of like the connecting that with the actual specifics of the treatment itself. So.
Are we going to solve cancer in our lifetime? Or will we solve any of the major ones? This is a big debate point of...
If I knew.
Well, I would say, the way I'll say it is it possible or probable that we could cure or prevent the overwhelming majority of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer? Pick the cancer you want. Is there one that we could essentially eliminate and people would very rarely even hear about it anymore?
I think there's a decent chance that during our lifetime, at least some of the cancers maybe could evolve into more like almost like chronic diseases.
Like diabetes.
Right. Something that you can manage over, like it's like just extending it, to the point where that's not the thing that kills you.
Got it. And which we've done with diabetes. Like people used to die from diabetes. Exactly.
And that's kind of, if you are able to manage it, you can
Or asthma. People would frequently die from asthma.
Those are great examples, right? And I think that is possible. And I think what happens too is like, that's where the prevention, early detection, I think are really important because the kind of area that's already been consumed under the curve is much smaller if you catch it early, right? Like a stage 1 breast cancer, survival is like literally 97% 5 years later.
It's incredible.
Whereas stage 4 is 25%, right? So you have a huge advantage that we can actually, get right now. So
why doesn't everybody just get tested at 30 years old for all of these cancers? Like, is there some downside to being tested beyond cost, or is it strictly a cost issue now?
So costs, I think, was a lot of the kind of heart of it for a long time. I think there's always, also in medicine, there's always a risk of over-treatment. Sometimes you cause...
What does it mean, over-treatment?
I'll give you a very concrete example is like, you see something in a mammogram, you can jump to chemotherapy or doing a biopsy and like, et cetera, getting, very aggressive, where if you do that and 95% of the cases, it's nothing, that's over-treatment. And so really it's about, targeting because like the interventions are not free, either monetarily or impact-wise, right?
Sure.
And
there's a cost to going under the knife. Like if you go into general anesthesia, you could not wake up.
Every time you throw a dice, right? And so what this is about is like, getting it to the point where it's worthwhile both from outcomes and risk standpoint as well as financial. And I think now we've crossed that threshold there's a set of genes that are very solidly accepted now, like the BRCA 1 and 2, Lynch syndrome genes, so that are connected to colon cancer, and familial hypercholesterolemia, the cholesterol ones.
So those are letting us know people have a more frequent chance of cancers and other diseases.
Early heart attack. Yeah.
Are there other things that we're starting to identify using DNA that are less about cancer, less about diseases, but more about, I don't know, other issues people might have, like mental health.
Yeah. So actually, mental health is huge in terms of for example, selection of drugs, right? Where right now, if you go on an antidepressant, it's a trial and error thing.
Yeah.
Turns out your genetics are what makes those trials work or not. And so instead of having people go through a year of like 3 months and 3 months and 3 months.
Yeah, I know people who have like, I'm on Wellbutrin now. I feel like I want to kill myself. Now I'm on Prozac. I feel like nothing.
So genetics actually
and
has a big impact on that.
And what does it take? 3-6 months every time they do that, and their whole lives
and every time they're still at risk, et cetera. And so
so
that's,
you'll be able to know
example.
which drug would be more apt for this person who suffers from severe depression.
Another one is opioid addiction. So there's a subset of the population that is at very high risk of opioid addiction. And so, before getting any opioid prescribed to you, you should know. Or your doctor should know.
The amount of opioid abuse is just insane.
Yeah, and it's
how is it even conscionable that we are just producing this number of opioids? It's weird.
Yeah, and I think I think it's goes back to kind of all the incentive structures throughout healthcare. I think there's a lot of aspects of the system, I think, that where the incentives are just completely the opposite of what one would think.
The incentive is to give prescriptions and you get a trip to Hawaii. Whereas if you give people preventative stuff, it's not like you get 1,000 people to take a preventative test or lose weight or get their BMI in a better position that you get sent to Florida. The drug companies send you to Florida based upon for these boondoggles. They pay off the doctors.
No, I mean, I think
it's ridiculous.
A lot of the healthcare kind of chain in general makes more money as the cost of healthcare goes up, right? And so
there's no incentive to lower it.
Yeah, and I think that's actually what makes, like, for example, super exciting with the announcement between Amazon, JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway a couple weeks ago.
Explain what that is.
So
in layman's terms,
I mean, it's still super early, but there are 3 huge companies that are big in terms of employees. They have about together 1.2 million employees, but they're also massive from a financial and like product might and distribution might in the case of Amazon, and what they've decided to do because of for their employee base is to start a kind of initially a nonprofit kind of operation to deliver better care with better cost structures for their employees to fix some of those like incentive problems.
Right.
And
because a lot people don't know this, but a lot of these big companies, they self-insure.
Exactly.
They're so big that they're not like, hey, we're going to take insurance from somebody, Blue Cross or whoever, Aetna, no offense to those companies, so that if somebody has ovarian cancer, we don't have to come out of pocket for $1 million. They say, you know what? We'll just pay everything.
Yeah, most companies over 1,000 people tend to self-insure.
Which means they just pay everything out of pocket. They know they're going to have a certain number of people who will be outliers and certain people. So for them, what I don't understand is why wouldn't, if I was Amazon or Google, because I think they do this with dentists. Do they have on-site dentistry where they've hired dentists to work at some of those companies?
Yeah, a lot of companies have kind of on-site clinical operations or agreements with the kind of local hospital chains or hospital systems. So there tends to be a really close collaboration.
This to me seems like the way to land the greatest talent ever would be to say, we are going to run the table and build a Google or Apple healthcare facility on campus with the best doctors that we poached from Memorial, Sloan Kettering, Stanford, wherever they poached them, pay them twice what they're getting paid, and then incentivize them with outcomes, not billable hours or whatever.
And a lot of companies do that. I mean, like, for example, even at Google, even 10 years ago, we had on-site doctors and it was
They
amazing.
were Google employees.
They were Google employees. I think they were Google employees. I'm not sure, like, the
maybe they
actual
outsourced
structure,
it or whatever.
But they
so they would give you.
It was an amazing service.
If you need antibiotics or something, but it wasn't like your primary physician.
No, they'd be your primary physician. Yeah. And
so they are doing it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Is the problem in healthcare generally that the consumers are not paying, therefore they're not customers? We've obscurified the payment process and price shopping. So nobody, if you're getting your knee scoped, doesn't matter to me because I don't pay for it anyway. So I don't even see, when I got my knee done for my meniscus, I didn't even see the bill.
Yeah.
Then at some point I saw it and I was like, what?
Yeah.
20 grand for 5 minutes under?
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Nuts. I mean, it's I think with health, I mean, it's one of those, one of those categories. It's like a forward investment where you will have a small amount of the population that is willing to very heavily invest in it. But the average people, don't tend to save, for example, right? And I think investing in health is kind of like that a little bit. But at the system level, investing in a healthy population, between that and education are probably some of the best investments a society can make, right?
I see you've raised $150 million. General Catalyst, our friends over there, Joel, put some money in.
Yeah, actually, Hemant Taneja is our
great.
main person.
Is that $150 million all you're going to need, or do you have to raise more money to get this thing over the finish line? You guys profitable yet? How many employees?
We're not profitable yet. We're about 140 employees, but we've got quite a bit of runway, and we've been really fortunate, to have an amazing group of investors backing the company.
So you figure it out in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, we're working. Things are looking quite good. So we're
thousands of people are taking these tests, tens of thousands, millions. What ballpark?
Yeah.
How many tests a year?
We haven't publicly talked about our numbers. That's one nice thing about not being a public company is that we don't have to be on that treadmill. But we've been very happy with
so tens of thousands would be a good guess, or more.
We've been very happy with
not thousands, obviously, but it's got to be tens of thousands, right?
We've been very happy with people taking the test.
Because when I look at it, I can start to do some back of the envelope math. Yeah, General Catalyst puts money in, C round, couple $100 million valuation. Yeah, they think they're going to 10x, couple billion. That means you got to get to $500 million in revenue. So you're at 50 million in revenue now. The number of tests, you got to be doing 100,000, 200,000 tests a year easily.
And again, the way I think about the business, actually, I literally don't think that we're in the testing business. And so that's not even the math that I really care about in my day-to-day. It's it is really about moving the risk curves and the outcome curves. You literally can take populations and shift the costs of cancer and the impact of cancer and of heart disease and other areas. So
here's a crazy question. And it's going to sound a little Black Mirror. Is there a danger in identifying people with some of these diseases that, in a way, it would disincentivize those people to procreate? Or if you found it out, you'd be like, I can't pass this on to somebody. And maybe there's some crazy approach to not passing these things on because people who have a terrible disease that they know about sometimes will not have kids because they don't want to pass it on. That already happens in society. We are aware of that.
Yeah.
But is this something that's starting to happen where people go, you know what, God, I'm going to have to get a surrogate because I don't want to pass this on, or I'm going to have to, spin or whatever. Yeah.
I think, there could be I think one could imagine a bunch of dystopian kind of scenarios, but in practice, what I see in practice happening is that when a lot of first of all, you can have a perfectly fine and normal life, with a BRCA mutation, et cetera. You have higher risk of developing disease, but, it's not a death sentence by any means. But what ends up happening is that as we start identifying hundreds of thousands, millions of people that have these different levels of risk, what happens is that we create markets. We create now a population that you can, drug companies can develop targeted therapies. For example, we work very closely with...
You have a community.
So we work closely with, for example, the BRCA Foundation, good friend Evan Goldberg, who started NetSuite, that got acquired by Oracle last year. So he's actually a BRCA1 carrier too, BRCA1 carrier. And he started this foundation where they're funding a lot of science around for people who have mutations, how do you prevent the cancers? How do you treat those specific cancers? And that's now starting to happen because it's a lot lot of you're talking millions and millions of people around the world
who are just suddenly discovering it. It's like the XMen. All of a sudden, you find all these literal mutants that have this mutation, and are we going to treat them like Professor X and nurture them, or
I didn't tell you about my superpowers. I'll tell you about my superpowers off the air. But
well, obviously, I have telekinesis and I'm Professor X, so I can read your mind. I already know.
Oh shoot! I should have worn my Faraday cage.
You have
helmet.
to wear your Faraday cage like Magneto. But it's interesting too because we do know, as you mentioned, hey, this person's got an opioid addiction potentiality that other people don't. We'll certainly find the compulsive gamblers gene, right? There is a gene for people who have a gambling addiction, and eventually we might find a violence gene, right? or people who have a predisposition towards violent behavior. This is around the corner, and that's where you're not testing for this, but that's where I think it's going to get very interesting is if all of a sudden we know from DNA that this person has a highly addictive personality, they are prone to depression and prone to violence and prone to opioid abuse. And like, there's going to be some people who, when they spit in these tubes, it's going to be setting off flags all over the place.
Actually, that I don't think is going to happen.
No?
Yeah, because I think those like are very complex outcomes where it's the combination of like millions and millions and millions of dice throws where your genetics, unless you have something that, there are some diseases, unfortunately, that like the child dies at like, 1 or whatever, like where that, are a certain outcome. But in most cases, really what all these things, especially behavioral stuff, these are very complex kind of combinations that I think are also combined with your environment, your life, your choices, et cetera, in a very complex way where like all of us, present company included, has the potential to be an axe murderer.
Sure.
And it's a question.
That's why we have
like,
a very wide desk here.
Exactly.
It gives me a little bit of room to react when you pull that axe out. But no, I mean,
and I think like, because like your genetics, it's almost like, it's the car that you got, but like, what you put in it, how you choose to drive it. Like, I think there's a lot so
it's a precursor, but it's not your destiny.
Exactly.
Right. And so you could have a violent gene.
Like, I don't think there's a violent gene.
You don't think there is?
No.
But there's definitely one for gambling and addiction.
Well, I don't think there's a gambling and addiction gene. I think there's like, in our genetics, there are like different like reward mechanisms. Like your serotonin reaction to the varied stimulus or risk tolerance, et cetera. And for each one of us, it's like a combination of tons of things, right? And some combinations will make someone more prone to
addiction,
be a gambler or be
an entrepreneur
or an entrepreneur. Exactly. And so I think these things manifest themselves where like it's the same sometimes like, thing that makes someone great. Like, and I think it's also one of the reasons why, right now, like even with the Me Too campaign, et cetera, like you see sometimes like these like falling from massive grace where like sometimes the traits that make someone, shine in one dimension, like that risk like complete risk tolerance.
Right. They would do something completely out of control
in another situation.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it is the defining characteristic of entrepreneurs is risk taking and addiction sometimes. Right. So like they have said, alcoholism is going to be, people believe alcoholism is hereditary. They've done studies that show it's not that you're addicted to alcohol. It's that you have the ability to, if you're faced with the opportunity, you might drink more than others or get more into it.
Like we all have like different vulnerabilities and strengths. And I think what the genetics allow us to do is to understand those, right? Yeah. And manage them better.
We need to have people who are really considered doing the work you're doing. Because there's some weird stuff that could come up. It could get weird.
I mean, it's very important, I think, to have a very strong, I think, standard around privacy, around the ethics of it, around how you communicate the information. For example, that's why every color test comes with a genetic counseling session, like by board certified genetic counselors that is just included in the price. But I think it's important to be very thoughtful.
You got to talk this out. When you find out you have some of these things, you want to talk to somebody.
So I think it's important that it be managed very thoughtfully.
Yeah.
But I don't think the dystopian path is a likely one. I think it's much more that it's kind of like the internet in some ways. In the early days, there's a lot of risk around privacy, and there's a lot of important work done by the EFF, by a bunch of other folk, et cetera, around trying to control the damage. And there's always damage that happens.
Sure.
But I think if there's enough oversight and thoughtfulness, I think you can actually get a lot of the value.
And the internet turned out so well. It only threw the last election to the Russians. So this might be the wrong analogy, but social media has been it is wild to watch having worked at Twitter.
It's pretty amazing. And
how do we not require real names at Twitter at this point in the game when they are getting so manipulated by bots? It's a no-brainer, isn't it, to make it just real names like Facebook? Wouldn't that control a little bit more of the ecosystem?
I think part of what Twitter is I think that there's an alter ego that can be the exact same as your ego or a very far drift.
A pseudonym.
And and
your avatar.
I think that spectrum, is part of what makes
I'm over it.
great. But
Literally my entire day, like today, my entire day was, I said some stuff about cryptocurrency, like you're buying, I just was like, listen, you're buying tokens that have no equity value. You have no protective provisions. Here's what we do in Silicon Valley in terms of protective provisions. We invest, we get our money out first. There's a legal system. There's lawyers and judges who understand how cap tables work. And if something fugazi happens, it's very easy to go to arbitration and figure it out. I mean, it could be arduous, but you're buying tokens. They have literally no...
It's like IOUs.
I might as well just throw you a bunch of poker chips and say they have value, and they do in some casinos, and they may be from a casino that's shut down. Who knows?
Yeah.
And I literally had like
Just
6 or 7 Pepe the Frog meme, following 1,000 people but have 100 follower accounts telling me what a fraud I am. And then I realized I'm arguing with the same person from Russia who's running, or China, wherever they're from, and they have some crypto scam they're running, and they're just trying to gaslight me. With 7 different accounts.
I think that the abuse part of Twitter is still a huge problem, right? Like I think identity is part of it, but I don't think actually it's like strong identity is the necessarily the only way to solve it.
Yeah.
But
There's a way to solve it? Seems like they can't get control of it.
Yeah, I think
and they have unlimited resources, and they do not have control over it.
It's a hard problem, but I
have a very simple solution. Everybody pays $10 to get the blue check mark, and like you just put it on your credit card and whatever, and then you get the blue check mark.
It's like just kind of it's like trying to solve spam with like kind of a tiny
just a tiny fraction of a payment was a good idea. But anyway, if everybody decides I'll pay $10 for life for this account to be verified in some way, connected to a credit card and a phone number, and then by default, you see only people who are verified in the system if you want to. And then if you want to have a free-for-all, you just flip a switch that says, show me all the insanity.
Yeah, it's like looking into your spam folder in email, right? It's kind of,
right, like we have no idea. I have no idea what's in my spam folder right now. I'm sure I have cousins or second cousins or who knows what people are in my spam folder. It's crazy. All right, listen, everybody stop what you're doing and talk to your physician about color. Go to color.com. This costs nothing. I'm doing all these tests right now. I'm going to start doing all these. Is this a real test you gave me? I can do this, or no? I got to go to my doctor.
I think that one is active, actually.
Maybe
if
not.
I'll check and I can send you one.
Let's be candid. I have money. I can pay for it myself. I don't need you to give me a freebie. People always try to give me stuff for free. I never do it. It's never free. This is what I've learned.
It's never free.
It's never free.
See, I was planning on asking you for a favor right after that. So now you
exactly.
Kind of like,
I'm like, you know what? I'll pay for it. You're like, yeah. Can you tweet your results? Can you tweet a video of you spitting? I'm like, literally, I had somebody the other day. This was a great one. Like with angel investing, I'm not an investor in their company, and they're like, our biggest problem is business development. We know who we want to get to, but we just can't get to the decision makers. Do you think you could help with that? And I'm like, you want me to come work at your company, do business development? Like, no, we just want you to email these 4 CEOs. I was like, but I'm not an investor in your company. Like, they're like, I know, but it would really help. I'm like, really help if I did a lot of things for you, but I don't know if I can call these people and close these deals for you. Thank you. All right, listen, everybody go check out Color. Othman, thanks for coming on the program. Everybody follow Othman. I don't know if it's are you active on the Twitter or you were just a passive? Are you a lurker?
I go in phases.
I take you as a lurker.
I go in phases. I'm not as prolific as I'd like to be.
But do you lurk? Do you check it in the morning? Check it in the half
Yeah. I always check it, but I'm so busy, and I'm also a perfectionist. So I feel
you
like
want to finish your feed.
I overthink. I overthink before I tweet. So
what's which app first when you wake up? You go to SMS, email, or to Twitter?
My top ones are
what order?
Nuzzle.
You go to Nuzzle.
Yeah.
Oh, very nice. So you get your top news, nice and clean.
News, and then email.
And then email. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I think that's probably most people.
Kind of
I think you're lying. Probably you look at the Moments tab first, and you get panicked. This is what I do. I just search for the word Mueller 3 times a day, and I just hope today's the day.
Yeah, today.
I love when
you don't have the button like John Oliver. Like,
is there a Mueller button?
He has "We got him" button. Like every time he presses it, like like the lights start flashing.
I get so much joy when like a Papadopoulos or a Mike Flynn or Manafort, every time they get one of these,
it's like the Schadenfreude
scumbags. And then I love the Greek one. I love Papadopoulos, who just immediately flipped And he's taking pride in taking down the whole ship. He's like super proud of it.
Yeah, fiction couldn't come up with this.
Literally, I was trying to explain to somebody the other day. I was like, do you realize I watch Black Mirror now, and it doesn't seem like science fiction to me because some of the stuff I'm being pitched on is crazier than what was in just 2 seasons ago. It makes the world.
Apparently, that was a problem for House of Cards, actually.
Oh my God! Yeah, how does House of Cards make it even?
I guess it has other problems now, but
how could House of Cards ever have the son-in-law and son of a reality star meeting with Russian operatives to get information, hacked information? Like Showtime. Did you watch Homeland? Homeland's amazing.
I don't. No.
I just love Claire Danes. She's just and that other guy who's the great actor, whatever his name is. Just great actors, but they're literally having a hard time keeping up because they have a character on that show.
They're like, check out CNN.
No, literally, they have a character on the show who's supposed to be. Marty Patinkin, I think, is the other actor who's really good on it with Claire Danes. But they have a guy on the show who plays the crazy guy from InfoWars now.
Oh, okay.
Whatever that dude's name is. And it's just the guy on the show, he doesn't seem, as an actor, as crazy as the actual real one.
Yeah. No, it's,
all right. Welcome to This Week in Conspiracies. We'll see you all next time. Everybody go check out Color. And thank you, Emmy Award-winning producer Jackie, for setting up such great guests on this podcast. You can rate and subscribe. That's the one thing you can do to help us here at This Week in Startups. You don't have to pay. Just go ahead and hit 5 stars on iTunes and tell your friends about the show if you get value from it. We'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.